Thanks for joining me as we review highlights of Chapter 4. The readings this week addresses the development cycle for ERP systems. Now, up to now, we've discussed ERP systems, what they are, what they do, a little bit about their architecture. It's no secret that they're complex. Because they're so complicated, it's a real challenge to implement them properly. And so because of this, processes have evolved over time to aid with the implementation of ERP systems. Most notably, the most traditional method is known as the SDLC, or the Systems Development Lifecycle. You plan, design, create an information system, and it does provide a lot of structure to it. And you need structure in something as complex and intangible as an ERP system. I say intangible because it's highly software intensive. It touches every function of the company. It involves software that people interact with continually. And because it's complex, you also take a systems approach. So the systems development lifecycle is a traditional life cycle that has been used for years with the implementation and development of IT systems. Here's a look at how the process flows. You investigate, analyze, design, implement, maintain. So you see this moves in a circle because there's ongoing maintenance, and once you've even implemented a system, other issues arise which require further investigation, further analysis, design, implementation. So it breaks the development of an ERP system into multiple parts, and it helps ensure that whatever it is you design and implement does address the problems that you've identified, the needs of your organization, the requirements of your end users. You know that because you've done your homework, and you do your homework and investigation in the analysis phase before you actually design it. Few of you would ever want to build a house without architecting the house, creating detailed blueprints, instructions on how to where to put the bricks, what the frame should look like. And furthermore, no one would build a house and then come back later and decide, you know, right in the center of the house there should be an additional room. Imagine the difficulty of cutting into a house to add an additional room and expanding it. We can understand that because a house is tangible, has physical components. An ERP system does not. There's a lot of software involved, and it's often difficult to see the burden involved in making late changes to a poorly architected or poorly thought out design. That's what the SDLC is intended to help address. Here's figure 4.2 from your text that shows an initial feasibility stage to understand, is there an opportunity to update the system? What business problem exists? Can we actually do it, which is the feasibility study? Then you analyze the information needs in detail, start developing your system requirements. Then you design the system, create the specifications, you integrate the system. Maybe you do a feasibility study again. You may need multiple feasibility studies, because as you start through the design, you might also uncover other issues you need to address, and you may have to decide how to address them. So you can see it's a highly structured and I would say common sense process where you think about what you're going to do, you carefully analyze it, then you implement it, and then later in maintenance you may start another round of development. There are other ways to do this though, and that potentially could be faster. For example, if you look at this diagram, what happens if you get your specifications in place, design the system, only to find out that the specifications have changed? Well, a rapid prototyping approach is one way around this. If you do small, it mentions here skeletal prototypes that really just preserve the look and feel of the system. They're not integrated with all the modules, they don't completely work, but it helps communicate the idea. Here's what we think you wanted in your requirements. Here's what we think we need to do. Evaluate this prototype, give us some feedback, and this way you can create your specifications on the fly and do a little bit of development along with the analysis and specification and requirements gathering, so you don't get to the end of the project and have to do major changes. Also, in some systems, they're fairly generic, but you can allow end users to develop certain applications. For example, some really smart people in your organization may put together an access database. Figure 4.3 shows the process flow of the prototype development. You build it, you test it, you show it off, you get input, you revise it, and you do another round. Now, ERP is a lot larger in scope and scale than other software. Typically millions of dollars, it's mission critical. It takes years to develop and implement. It requires significant change management. Remember, it touches everyone in the organization, and everyone has their opinion about how the business system ought to operate. So it does require a lot of extra work, a lot of leadership, a lot of communication and articulation of a vision. And that exists to the degree that, or it's required to a degree that other packaged software may not require. There's different ways you can implement an ERP system. A comprehensive implementation, where you're tearing out everything that used to exist and putting in something completely new. You could do, taking a vendor solution and using everything they've got, or you could only use some of what they have, or just some core elements, and minimize how much business process re-engineering you need to do. It's something to think about. Maybe you envision the need for changes, and that drives the need for an ERP system, but there's different levels to which you can implement it. All right, so implementation methodology. We've seen the SDLC, but there's a slight modification of that for the ERP life cycle. For example, in the system development life cycle, you see initiation, analysis and design, implementation, operation. But over in the upper right-hand corner, you see scope and planning, analysis and design, acquisition and development, implementation, and operation. Acquisition and development are put together because typically ERP systems are required from vendors, but they also require some amount of customization to fit into your particular context. Here's some of the things that happen when you implement a system. You have to do a gap analysis, understand the physical scope, understand what business processes are going to be touched in this implementation, how much modification needs to be done, what about resources, what about budget, what modules are going to be implemented. So you can see this is really complicated, and if you're ever in an organization that decides to do this or is thinking about doing this, all I have to say is watch out. It is a tsunami of complicated technical and human resources work. Now, when you do implement an ERP system, you convert between the old and the new. There's a phased approach. You could do a pilot approach where you start the new while you have the old in place until it's decided to completely go live. Go in parallel for some time, or just a complete cutover and go live with a big bang. Okay, notice the role of change management in each of these, getting the commitment from stakeholders in your organization through the analysis and design phase, acquisition and development. It's a big change. It's very big for all your stakeholders to handle and to think about. You'll get lots of resistance. It takes lots of work. That's where change management comes in. Okay, system failures occur when the attention is not paid to change management from the beginning stages. So whoever's leading this team has to be sharp, has to be able to articulate a vision, and has to really promote the idea or give people reasons why the change is needed and why they will want to be a part of it. That's really critical, because if you do not get the support of everyone, it's just going to make the job much more difficult. Now, different companies have their own, or different ERP vendors have their own version of ERP implementation. For example, Ernst & Young looks at the value proposition, the reality check, is the organization ready for change, setting the right expectations, getting the right blend of people, skills, methods, and then measuring the results, celebrating success. The Deloitte and Touche Fast Track system, scope and planning, visioning and targeting, redesign. This is as is and to be. I've been in an ERP implementation that did that, where you outline how does your current system work, how would you like it to work. That is the as is and to be. Then there's implementation. There are different elements to the Deloitte and Touche method. You've got project management, IT architecture, processes and systems, change leadership, training documentation, accelerated SAP or SAP. SAP is another vendor where you prepare, you have your business blueprint, realization based on the business blueprint, steps are taken to configure the new system, final preparation, go live and support. Accenture, you have planning, delivering, managing, operating. So there are multiple vendors. They each have their own flavor of and style of implementation, but they're very similar and they're very common sense in approach and tend to cover the same things. There's also a method known as Agile. They start with smaller requirements. They start and deliver functionality incrementally. The whole intent of this is do a little bit at a time. Instead of doing all the design at once and then all the implementation later, you do a little design, little coding, little implementation, and grow it over time so you avoid a big bang type cutover at the end. All right, so I'll allow you to read that on your own, but it is an up-and-coming methodology that's designed to minimize some of the risk with a big bang approach. Here you can see comparison and contrast with SDLC and the ERPLC, Systems Development Lifecycle and the ERP Lifecycle. ERP is a system, so they're going to be very similar. But keep in mind that in the SDLC, its focus has been on designing a system, whereas the ERP, you're going to be purchasing, customizing, and implementing the system. So I'll let you read this in the text, but as an interesting comparison, you can see it's very similar with some modifications that are specific to the unique elements of the ERP system. Also, this whole process should be managed using good project management expertise. You need a plan, you need project owners. You may have a project organization within IT or within your entire organization that does manage this as a project using standard processes and procedures. Here's an example of a project organization, and some companies don't run projects unless they have resources or project leaders that are resourced from the project office who are certified, trained in project management, understand the processes and what templates to use. In a major undertaking such as ERP, you really need to focus on keeping yourself organized. And the text goes on to explain some of the components of the project office and also project teams. There could be different teams to do different elements of the ERP lifecycle or the SDLC in either case. So that's a quick overview of this week's readings. It's all about how to implement these systems. They're complicated. They touch so many elements of managing a business, from the culture to human resources to technology. You're dealing with intangibles. You have to keep yourself organized, keep things highly structured. So there are a lot of processes in place now to support that. Keep in mind that ERP is unique in systems design and implementation, so it has its own flavor of the SDLC, as do vendors who offer the ERP systems. They have their own flavor of how to implement it. And when it does get implemented, it is typically done through the techniques of project management and usually led by the project office. So thanks for joining the briefing, and we'll see you in the discussion threads in Module 4.